This is the Jess Walhoff Broadcasting Network on air, a podcast about trail and ultra running, but really, it's about becoming who you are meant to be. I'm your host, Jess Walhoff, inviting you into conversations about resilience, wonder, and the quiet magic of putting one foot in front of the other. Out on the trail, we learn to move our mountain, not by force, but by presence and persistence. And in that movement, we find joy in the journey.
Hey, welcome to the JWBN On Air podcast. Today I got something special for all of you guys. I have a guest. Be a guest if you're watching. There's somebody sitting with me, and we're not in my living room. We're at Lover's Tree at Good Earth State Park. And this special guest here today is my first guest of the podcast, so we could also say my first victim. Not the first time he's been victimized by me running. So everybody, welcome Brian Harms. One of my good running friends here. So let's start out, Brian, with just telling a little bit about your background. So how about, let's start out from the very beginning. Where are you born and raised?
Well, thank you, Jess, for having me on. Being the first victim, I guess, is kind of a little scary, but I've listened to your first four podcasts and, proud of you and your new endeavor. You can talk and you're kind of a natural at this. But anyway, question was a little history. It's kind of a long story. I'll try to make it kind of short, but born in Florida, Navy brat. From there, we basically moved about every 2 years. So it was a little rough growing up. I mean, you meet friends and you get some good friends, and then it was time to move again. Well, running career started in 8th grade. We got to another new school, and all I remember about that day was we had a half a day of school, sitting in homeroom. Everybody seemed to have somebody to talk to. I don't think we were studying much of anything, and I was bored. Came over the loudspeaker. Anybody interested in cross country to please report to the gym. So I figured, I had no idea what cross country was, but I figured it couldn't be any worse than what it was sitting in that homeroom. So I went to the gym. Found out what cross country was, and we had practice the next day, and I didn't have the right shoes or anything like that, but from day one at school there, I was about the fastest on the team. So that's where it started, 8th grade, and I've been running ever since.
So running came pretty naturally to you right away.
I guess so.
You weren't dead out there running around the soccer fields or whatnot and not dying.
No. So.
Nice. So you already had an even kilter pace. You weren't a born sprinter.
No, not a born sprinter. Just noticed early on that, I could run and keep running, I guess. I didn't really learn pace, though, until 9th grade. The next year in school, we didn't, where I was at, we didn't, high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. So 7th, 8th, and 9th grade was, I guess they called junior high. So I had a new coach there, and my pace would be, in the mile run, I would go out really, really fast, because everybody else was going out really, really fast, and you didn't want to fall behind. But then your second lap and your third lap were just kind of trying to recover, and then the fourth lap you'd see who had the best kick left. So I was trying to break 5 minutes, and I couldn't do it. And I remember getting towards the end of the season, the coach called me into his office during school hours, and I went in there, and he sat me down and he said, "Brian, you need to run slower to run faster." Well, that made no sense to me at all. So, and what he did, he put it down on paper, 5 minutes for the mile, you have to run average 75 seconds a quarter. And he showed me my splits that I had been doing. I'd be in the low 60s for the first split, and then, they'd get up into the 80s by the third lap, and then last lap, whatever. So he said, "I want you to go this pace first lap. I don't care what place you're in. Second lap, third lap, and then we'll see where you're at. And, you should be feeling a lot better." And so that's what I did. And it was very hard running that way. But, you know, I think first lap came by, I was way behind everybody. The second lap, I started catching up. The third lap, and I was right on what he wanted me to run for those splits. And third lap, I almost caught up to the lead. And the fourth lap, I got into the lead somewhere on the backstretch, if I remember right. And I broke 5 minutes.
Wow.
And so
to run slower, run faster by running slower, is that something you've been able to, especially now knowing what you've done throughout your grown-up adult career, but something that stick with you throughout your college and then?
it does. You know, I still get in trouble a lot of times on my first mile, but the older I've gotten, you know, I can't run that fast anymore. So I just, you know, it's a lot easier to do it. I've even done some of my, I hate 5Ks, but George, Iowa, I got my George, Iowa shirt on from the 4th of July last weekend. You know, because it feels like a sprint, you know, when you become an ultra runner, but you get into that, you try to go out slow and, you know, and run even splits. You know, I ran pretty even splits last weekend. It wasn't quite where I wanted to be, but I also had a couple grandsons that thought they could beat me, and they did do that this year, so good for them. I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think you did, about running slower to run faster. Yeah. And I think it was funny because you said that how the 5K, as an ultramarathoner, the 5K is a little scary now, because you sent me a meme or a reel last week or earlier this week about asking an ultra runner, hey, what's the scariest thing for an ultra runner? And it said 5K, and it's so fast. So true. Me running a 10K today, I finished my 10K, which was 9.5K, and I hit the finish line, and I hands on my knees, and I said, oh shit, and they all laughed at me. And I'm just like, it's way too short and way too fast. Like, they don't understand a lot, especially people who don't run ultras, don't understand the type of training we do.
Yep.
Exactly. And that speed is really, I mean, we do include speed work into our workouts, but we're not running 6 miles, 3 miles, all out very often. It hurts.
It does hurt, and you know, a lot of the locals in George know me, and they see me before the race. Oh, you got this. You can do this easily, and I'm like, I mean, it's not
right.
Quite so easy.
They think just because you run 30, 100, 200-mile races that, oh, he's going to go out and win the 5K, when there's a huge difference between those distances. Yep. And the shorter ones. So going on after you get your 5-minute mile in 9th grade, you continue running through high school, and then you also went to college and ran in college, correct?
Yep. Ran at Black Hills State. It was Black Hills State College at that time in the 1977 when I started there. And I went from the fastest at our high school to not the fastest anymore. So that took a little adjusting, but that was fine. Some of my best friends that I've met through running have been high school, but I've only kept in touch with basically one of those people. But the ones in college, I've kept in touch with a lot more of those. They don't all run anymore. A couple of them are very, you know, they're a little older than me, but they're very, very good bike riders. One a little bit younger than me, Mike Bent, got me into ultra running, trail running first, and then it turned into ultra races. But so the longest distance in college at that time was the 6 mile. It's the 10,000 meters now, which 6 miles is one less lap. And so the further that I could go, the better I would do. But they didn't have the marathon yet, I don't believe, or if it did, coach never thought about putting me in it. So I needed longer distance.
The longer you went, the better it went.
Yes.
And then, so after college, you continued some running, correct?
Yeah, I kept running. You know, I've said this before. You know, one day you wake up and you've got a family. My wife Jean, we started having kids, and we got married in. Why did I say that? We got married in '84, and we had our first child in '85, and you wake up one day, you've got a mortgage, you've got insurance payments, you've got car payments, you've got kids, you got diapers. So, you know, work became, you know, for both Jean and I, the main thing, but I always did keep running. It was always on the roads. Anywhere, most of the time was 3 to 6 miles in and around Belle Fourche. That's where we lived for almost 40 years. Actually, I brought her home. We lived in Spearfish. I had my trailer house in Spearfish. I'd lived there for 7 years before I got married, and then we bought a house in Belle Fourche because that's where her work was at, and it was closer to my work at the time.
So after college, I want to talk about I think it was your first marathon that you ran. It started Lake Pactola area,
Yep.
Ran towards Rapid City. How did that go for you?
Well, I ran.
What year was this also?
Okay. I ran one in 1980, but I didn't have enough money for the entry fee. So it wasn't an official marathon. Kind of trained for it. You know, I was much younger. I was a lot less heavier than I am now. And went and ran a 2:36 something in that one. I think I was about 4th or 5th place, but I didn't count, you know, because I basically just jumped into the race at the start. Get to an aid station and what number are you? What number? And I don't have a number. So I'm just doing this for fun. Anyway, so I did that one in 1980, and then in 1981, I had a real job at that point, so I could afford the entry fee for the next year. So I entered the same race again, and this time I ran 2:31:07 is what the newspaper clipping I looked at it the other day. A friend of mine had sent it to me. Still had it, so it was good for 4th place. One of the hardest races, you know, the first 18 miles was a piece of cake, I guess. I mean, if there is such a thing. We didn't have the hydration or nutrition knowledge as we do now. When I got to 18 miles, I could finally see the leader of the race, and I moved into 3rd place, and I knew I had that race won at that point. And then when I got to 20 miles, everything went to heck, to say the least. And that 10K I still rank it as the hardest 10K that I've ever had to run, because I was done. I ended up with the 2:31. You know, I was well under the 2:30 pace at that point, but you know, it is what it was. So I always planned on doing another one because I knew I could break 2 hours and 30 minutes, but life got in the way, and I just never ever trained for one ever again.
Did you jump from collegiate running to that marathon then, or did you do like some half marathons in between there?
No,
too,
you know, the half marathon really wasn't a thing yet, Jess. Okay. At that point. 10 milers were a thing. I ran 10 miler down at Custer the one year, and I won that race. And I think the only reason I won that was they had us on that wildlife loop or somewhere on, I don't know. There was buffalo right there on the road, and I was leading the race, and here you are. You know, I'm weighing about 120 pounds at that point, and here comes this guy coming down the road and going between buffalo, and is scared. I guess American bison is the correct terminology if Lance Smith is listening. But anyway, now I kind of forgot what I was.
Something about the buffalo and the 10
yeah, oh
race,
yeah, the distance of the races, yeah. 10Ks were really big. 5Ks really weren't that big yet back then. 10 miles and 10Ks were the big races. I'm not sure when the half marathons came around the Black Hills and got more popular, but they did. And I didn't run my first half marathon officially until Deadwood Mickelson back in the, I don't know, when did that race start roughly?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it was back in about 2010 to 12, 15, 2012 maybe, somewhere in there I ran my first official half marathon.
Okay. So you run your first unofficially first marathon. The next year you officially complete the marathon. And then like you said, after that, you knew you could beat that 2:30 time, but you didn't have the chance to go back just because of life. You're still doing some time out there running, working out, staying fit somewhat, but running's kind of put on the back burner. When did you start kind of going back into doing some races here and there?
Good question. I mean, I'm one of those people, I really don't like to race. Between all my high school and college races, you know, you push yourself to, I would push myself anyway to the point where I'd puke and, you know, be gasping for air no matter, you know, the pace I went out, it wouldn't matter. You know, you push yourself to the limit. And so races aren't really big for me. So I guess to answer that question, Mike Bent did get a hold of me in roughly end of 2014, beginning of 2015, and he was living in Rapid City at that time. He had been gone, living in Utah for a while, and he texted me, called me. I don't even know if I didn't have a phone then, but probably called the landline and said, "Hey, you want to join us? You know, Black Hills Runners Club is doing a trail run usually on Saturdays." And I thought, okay, you know, I really didn't know what I was signing up for, and you know, I had no vest, I didn't have hydration things, so you know, back in college and high school, we didn't have that either. I still call it today that we would camel up. You know, you drink a ton of water and eat a little bit of food and hope that lasts you while you're out there. You know, I watch the grandkids now, or even my kids when they're playing soccer and stuff, they take breaks and they go get water. And I was thinking we'd be out there 8 to 10 miles training and we wouldn't have any water. and I'm not saying that's the way to do it, because you kind of get dehydrated. But anyway, I didn't have any of that stuff. Showed up. We went, I can't even tell you the place for sure, Mike would know it, but we'd had a storm that fall, and on the trail there was just trees after trees after trees down. So basically we were on a trail run, but we were also getting like a CrossFit workout too a little bit, because we were either going around, going over, going under trees. And I didn't know if that was normal or not. I didn't think it was normal, but what I remember from that first thing, besides Mike bleeding by the time we got done, he caught himself somewhere on a branch, and was the people that were involved with the run. They're a different mix of people that you would meet on the roads, you know, the trail people. So Mike didn't think I'd be back for another one after that, but you know, I think I knew I would, you know, and I was taking notes mentally, seeing what people were doing, you know, for hydration, for fuel and eating, because you get into that mentality where from a road runner, okay, we're going to go 10 miles. Okay, well, that's only going to take me an hour, you know, and then you get on the trails and, well, that ain't going to take an hour. You know, up in the Black Hills, there's a lot of single track and pretty steep, pretty technical in areas. So, you know, there's a lot of times where if you make 5 miles in an hour, you're doing a really good pace. So that was something I had to get adjusted to. And the other big thing was on the roads, I felt like you could never walk. You always had to run. So I ran all those hills at the beginning of those first few runs, and by the time I'd get about to the top, it'd be like, I can walk faster than this, and you know, this is taking the fun out of it. So once I took that first walk while going uphill, I've been doing that ever since, and I actually start a lot sooner now at the bottom of the hill instead of waiting maybe halfway or so.
So in the end, you're still going slower to go faster if you're walking the hill than running
that's
it.
very true, because you know, you feel like you're going at you're running up it pretty fast, but when you look at your watch, you know, a mile is still a mile, but you know, it's much slower. So if you're walking a little bit faster than you are, you know, you're almost going the same speed as you said, Jess.
Yeah. I know I've seen videos about where you find where you're kind of the degree of a slope where you're more efficient walking than running, and that's different for everybody, you know. Especially running with our little friend, I'm gonna say little friend Andy, who's not quite 5 feet tall. She's got these tiny little legs, and she's more efficient running a lot of these hills where I am so much more efficient walking them. Not that I can quite walk her running speed, but I do a lot better. Otherwise, I'm dying if I try to keep up with her running speed. And that's just,
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
everybody's different.
I didn't get into the trails until I was about 55 years old. I'm 67 now, so I've been in this trail running about 12 years or so. And what I tell people is, I could have went up those hills back in my 20s much faster, but going downhill, I don't think I would have gone a whole lot faster than I do today. You know, gravity works. I've always said that you're really not a true trail runner till you hit the dirt, bite the dust. And it took me a little while, but I finally, you know, bit the dust, and I've bit the dust plenty of times since then. But it's just a whole different thing. The people are funner. You can walk, you're eating, you're socializing. That maybe when you're going up the really steep hills, even walking, there's not much socializing there yet, but it's just fun.
Yeah. So you get to do your first trail group run, and then when do you run your first ever trail race then?
My first, I guess, official trail race was at Crow Peak. Chris Storrs put it on. He's one of the RDs of the Black Hills 100, and it's a single track. You go up 3.5 miles roughly, then you come back down 3.5 miles, and so I don't know, it wasn't very fun. I mean, it was a lot funner coming down, but I remember going up that, I couldn't even make maybe a half a mile, and I was walking already. And you know, the leaders came down, the guys that were in first and second. You know, there's not even hardly enough room, so I'd hug the tree next to me to get off the trail so they could go down, and they were just going at warp speed, and it was just like, I don't know how they do that. And so that was my first official one, and I can't tell you what year that was, and I think they only did it 1 year.
Okay.
On that. But what I really consider my first trail race would have been at Black Hills 100 when they introduced the 30-kilometer distance. I'd helped at the.
Make you think really hard there.
Yeah, I didn't do my homework
they just
well enough.
They just celebrated their 16th anniversary, 15 years because of COVID. But so if we go back, they started in 2010. Must have been their first year, 2011.
Yeah.
First year.
I would say about 2016. See, Black Hills 100, when they started it, they ran for a number of years with a 50-mile, 100K, and 100 miles. So.
And they had a different turnaround point, right? They used to run to Rapid Creek. So they'd stay on the Centennial is what I've been told.
That I don't know, because I volunteered those first few years because I knew there was no way I could, a 50-mile race. I mean, I might do a 10-mile trail run with the group, and that was hard. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing 50 more miles or 40 more miles. So I volunteered and helped, and most of my job areas were around closer to Sturgis. But
and the 100K that was out and back from Sturgis, then, where they turn around at Dalton Lake?
Probably something like that. That'd be close. You know, I don't know exactly. I didn't help the first year. The second year I helped there, and what my job was bringing in the supplies to Crooked Tree Aid Station and to Bulldog Aid Station, because those aren't crew accessible.
How was the road drive in there?
Both of them were a little tricky. I had my pickup, which is, you know, it's a 1500 series Chevy truck, Silverado, and going into Crooked Tree, you know, if you would meet somebody coming the other direction, I'm not sure what you would do, because, you know, there's not enough room. And then when you get to the aid station at the bottom of the hill, you know, you go forward, back up, go forward, back up just to try to get turned around so you can get out of that aid station and turn and up there. But so that was my first real experience at seeing people out on the trail and suffering. And that year I gave a kid a ride back. He was from Minnesota who had sprained his ankle out of Crooked Tree. You know, he wanted to go on, but it was just, he couldn't even hardly walk. So that was kind of my first DNFer that I ever witnessed. You know, he was upset about it, but then, you know, he was also sensible about it. And then we went and found his sister. His sister was his crew. So, you know, there's no cell phone service up there to speak of. So it took us a little while to find her, but we did. And so I get off track. I like to ramble.
That's okay. But then, yeah, take us to your first 30K there. Probably, gosh, I ran the 50K in 2018. So the 30K was introduced before then is what we can configure with math. So maybe 2016 or so?
Yeah, we'll say somewhere in there. And I went in unprepared. I mean, I was in sort of good enough shape, but I did not have a hydration vest. I looked at the distances between aid stations and thought this will be no problem. I can do this. And I was pretty much doing it okay until we got to Alkali. And it was a very hot, that first year was extremely warm. And I was keeping up with Chris Beckett from Rapid City, and we had been running together for quite a while. Well, she didn't spend hardly any time at the aid station, and I didn't want to lose her. And so I drank up some and did whatever, and then we had to go up the great big hill. It's been rerouted since then, but we had a big hill to go up, and we got to the top of that. Well, I lost Chris about halfway up it. I couldn't even walk fast enough to keep up with her. And I got to the top and thought, okay, now I can go ahead and run. And as soon as I started running, both of my calves at the same time just, they just tightened up and brought me to my knees. I mean, I was just like, what is happening here? So, I mean, I kind of know what's happening now. Is I was low on sodium. I was, you know, lots of different things. But so I still had probably, at that time, the course has been rerouted. You know, today it's about 7 miles from Alkali to the finish. Back then it was about 5 miles. So I probably had, you know, 4.5 miles left at that point because we just went straight up that hill instead of, you know, the switchbacks. And so I got on, found a pine tree. There's lots of pine trees around, and stretched my calves and kind of got so I could walk. And then I finally started jogging again and was getting passed by people. And probably about 2.5, 3 miles from the finish, there was a right-hand turn on this road, and it was marked, but I was on at that point, we weren't on single track. We were on an old trail road that is, you know, been abandoned. And I was on the left side of that road. Well, on the right side was the marker to make a right-hand turn, and I missed it. And I kept going, and then I started going up another hill. And I hadn't done much training over in that area, even though I lived fairly close to it. And I just thought, this probably isn't right, but, you know, I'm going slow. Nobody's passing me anymore. And I had just gotten a GPS watch, and I looked at my watch, and, you know, knowing 30K was about 18.5 miles or so, and I was coming up on that, but I knew I wasn't coming anywhere near Sturgis. And so I had missed a turn. But in the meantime, I was dehydrated, I was thirsty, I was hot. So I went back, just turned around finally, and went back and looked for a turn, and I finally found the turn and where I had messed up. And so that was my memories from my first trail race, that the last mile is on cement, and there's the creek is down there, and I was so dehydrated I thought about going down to that water, but then I knew I wouldn't be able to get back up because the way I felt. And so it wasn't a great experience, put it that way.
But you've since gone back and done the 30K again. Better experience the next time or two. How many times have you done the 30K there?
I did it the next year. I won at Redemption on the course.
Yeah.
And I was much more prepared. I'd done training in that area and a lot more hill work and
Think you lost?
didn't get lost. And I say that, the year that I ran it was the very first year, so that was the course record, whoever won it that year.
Yeah.
So the next year, I actually broke the course record,
wow.
but so did the other 10 people that finished in front of me. So, it was a much better experience, but still, at that point, 30K was plenty long enough for me.
And you've pretty much been out in the Black Hills almost every year to either run, crew, pace, volunteer,
Yep.
which is fantastic. So let's go to 2020, I believe, is when you then decide to get the nerve to run your first 50K, your first ever ultramarathon at the age of what, 62? What made you say at 62, I want to run an ultramarathon?
Yeah, I was gonna, with the 30K that I had at Black Hills, I was gonna run the 50K at Black Hills that year, and like you've said, they canceled all the Black Hills races that year. So the only reason I was gonna do that was because if you ran all 4 of those races, you could get the nice man in black woman skull, buffalo skull painted, and I thought that's pretty cool. I don't know if I can ever do the 50 mile or the 100 mile, but I think I can do the 50K. So that was the inspiration behind that. Well, then they canceled that. And one night I was going through Facebook and all of a sudden popped up Glacier Hills, the race that you co-direct now, and came up, and they were offering the 50K, and it was a loop course, 5 loops at 10K each. And the other thing was we'd bought our house that we live at now in George, Iowa, the acreage, and it's really close to that. So I thought, well, I could just drive over there, because they were having all kinds of restrictions on just restrictions. And so I thought, well, I'll go down there and I can stay at the house, get up early, go to the 50K and, drive home the next day and do that. I had to get permission through work at that point to do this, and I had to be at the start line. I couldn't be around anybody, they told me, and this and that. So anyway, so that was, I signed up for that one and thought, let's do this.
And for the most part, it went pretty okay for you.
Yeah, it went pretty good. I mean, you were in that race, and I wasn't that far behind you on that first, that's...
First 5 miles until we were going downhill.
Yeah, and then it was dark yet, and I tripped on something, and down I went.
I didn't even hear you scream.
No, and I don't know, maybe I was shocked, but, it was like 14 degrees when I got there that morning on my car thermometer, and so I was dressed warm, and so I had a spot on my knee that it kind of, I had tights on of some sort, but I couldn't see my knee, but it didn't hurt, so it didn't slow me down any, and did the first loop, and then, so I didn't know the course at all, so it was kind of nice, the first loop is all in the dark, the part of the second loop was in the dark, and you can kind of see the sunrise, so it was a new course then again, but I think it was on that second loop that my hydration vest, my hose froze, so I couldn't get anything out of that. I wasn't evidently drinking enough to keep it moving, but you see the aid station every, 4 miles and 2 miles, because there's a 4 mile loop, a 2 mile loop. So, and they had hot scratch in there, so that tasted good. I didn't finally, I carried that bladder full of frozen stuff most of the race until about the second to last loop. I finally decided I didn't need to carry that anymore, but it was keeping me warm too in the same token. So, and as I never looked at my watch one time because I didn't need to. It's 5 loops. I didn't care about my time. I just wanted to finish, and I remember getting done, and one of the race directors was at the finish line, and people are clapping and everything, and I said, This is for younger people. This is a one-time, one and done. I am never ever
Famous
doing this
last
again.
words.
Yes. All
Famous
ultra
last
runners
words.
have said that, I think.
I mean, I've said that at my first ever marathon. I said never again, and a week later I was signed up for another marathon in 3 months. I didn't say that about my first ultra marathon though. But, so yeah, you said that, never again, but here 2 years later, no, 1 year,
Next year.
next is the very following year, you are signed up and running the Black Hills 50 mile.
Yeah, and the only reason I probably did that, there was a whole big group of people that I trained with that were all going to run the 50 mile. So, you know, and I didn't want the race to fill up, so it was probably 2 weeks later, or whenever the sign up came up for Black Hills, maybe at the beginning of the year, I don't remember exactly, but anyway, I signed up for the 50 mile. And maybe partly peer pressure, partly you're supposed to get a little wiser as you get older, but I'm not sure that happens. But so I had a lot of training partners, and thought, well, this is going to be good.
So, you know, when you had initially signed up to run the Black Hills 50K in 2020, and you said, oh, I don't think I'll ever do the 50 mile, 100 mile, you run your first 50K and you said never again. What was the little light bulb or the switch that went off that said, I can do a 50 mile? Was it just the peer pressure, the training?
You know, if you can figure that out, Jess, we wouldn't be sitting here under the tree probably. We could be retired. But, you know, I don't know. It's just the experience of being out there, you know, it's learning to embrace the suck, I guess.
Yeah.
I haven't totally embraced it and learned how to do that. It's one of my goals is if I can keep doing these ultras is enjoy them more in the moment. Mm-hmm. There's still lots of time in the moment. I do enjoy them immensely. And there's other times where I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing? You know, I don't need to be doing this, but you know, I do enjoy it. It's hard to describe it, I guess, in words.
And 21 was a pretty nice year weather-wise, I'm going to say. And I remember seeing you fly by me with like probably 6 miles to go or something like that. But how did that 50-mile race go for you? You
know, my family was crewing for me. We had made up all these shirts. I should have wore that shirt today, but tie-dyed shirts, because I'm a child from the, you know, I was influenced from the 70s quite a bit. And so at that point, I think we had 8 or 9 grandchildren. Gene will probably be upset. I don't know the answer to that. But anyway, 8 grandchildren. I'm pretty sure on that. And so kind of wanted, you know, Jean, she crewed me for the first 2 aid stations. And then my 3 sons did the next ones. And then Jean and the boys were all there at Alkali. But to answer your question, it was going okay until it wasn't. And it was at the Nemo Guest Ranch, going through that area. My left leg started hurting so bad, and I wasn't sure what was wrong. I had brought my foam roller with me, but Jean didn't bring it there at the 8. You know, I had some other stuff to eat and drink, and so I made her go get the foam roller out of the car, and so I was on the front porch there of the Nemo Guest Ranch, foam rolling my leg, thinking, how am I going to get to the finish line? Because what are you, 14 miles,
yeah,
12 miles?
14 miles in there, 14,
yeah.
15.
And it's like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So I did take a couple ibuprofen, just kind of worked out whatever was there and thought, well, I need to get moving. I can't sit here all day. So, and as the race went on, I kept getting stronger and stronger. And when I got coming down finally off the ATV section into Dalton, you know, it's about a 1 mile downhill stretch into there. And I was feeling great. I was like, I'm ready to start my kick right now. And so, you know, that race was extremely fun from Dalton to Sturgis. Nothing wrong. Like you said, it was a pretty good year. The creek wasn't running at all, so it was fun.
And then the following year, you decide to tackle the 100.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you get that buffalo skull, if you can save the shorter races for the end, you know, that's the way to do it. And so I had the 50K and the 100 miles. So, you know, after all those races, whether it's a 50K, a 30K, a 50 mile, when I get done, I mean, I can't hardly walk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, after the 50 mile, you think, gosh, I got to double this, you know, can I do that? You know, and thought, well, that was about the time I was retiring from work. So I thought, well, I'll have more time to train, even though we were going to move back here on this side of the state full time. But, you know, I wasn't going to get the hills in. But, you know, as it turned out, there are hills in eastern South Dakota, you know, here at Good Earth State Park, which is kind of Jess's, you know, home stomping grounds for running. But then there's also Great Bear, and Jess here was also training for the Bighorn 100 that year. So I thought, well, I'll just show up on Saturdays and do whatever Jess is doing, and that should get me to the finish line of a 100 miler. And you run more by, you don't care how far you go, you run timed runs. So, and I do. At first I thought, well, that's a little bit weird, but I really enjoy the timed runs a lot better than the, you know, setting out a set mileage and trying to do it that way. So
I had questions to follow up on that, and then they all just fly by because I know. Let's go straight to that 100-mile race. That was a very interesting year, weather-wise.
Yeah, it was.
I'd say the first probably 40 miles was pretty good. I don't remember if it was over. It was probably nice temperatures during that day. But then most people, when they got to Nemo or were leaving Nemo, a very bad thunderstorm came in.
Yeah, but I made it to Nemo, and it was perfectly fine at Nemo.
Yeah.
You know, since I was over 60 at that time, I could have pacers the whole way. And so I had plenty of friends that said, yes, you know, I'll help pace. And that's where I picked up Chris Riley. And he was going to take me from Nemo to the turnaround at Silver City back to Dalton Lake, which was going to be a total of about a 50K, 31 miles or so. Get me through the night so I didn't get lost. I get directional problems, and I'm not a big fan of being by myself in the dark anyway. But anyway, like you said, left Nemo, everything was fine. You know, you can't really see a whole lot through the pine trees and stuff. You know, you don't know if the weather's changing or whatever, but the weather did change.
Quite fast.
Yeah, and I had an emergency poncho in my vest, which was good. When the rain hit us, I mean, it just hit us bingo all at once, thunder, lightning. Chris Riley got his emergency poncho on. Brian struggled with his. Chris finally got his on, and then he helped me. You know, he's always told me you got to help yourself first, so he did, and which was smart on his part. And when I finally got it, they come with a hoodie type thing too, so when I got mine on, actually the hood part was in my face, so I couldn't see, so we had to flip that thing around so I could at least breathe again and see out of it. And we proceeded to go on, but I got really cold in that section, and we got to Pilot Knob. You know, I'm going to say we ran maybe 2-3 miles in the rain doing that. Got to Pilot Knob, and I was frozen. I mean, I was done. I mean, I wasn't going to quit, but I don't know how I would have, you know, managed to go on without the crew. You know, if I'd been by myself, it would have been tough. You know, I've always kind of said that, you know, I didn't want to quit that race. I never felt like quitting the race. I knew I was going to get to the finish, but I don't know, without the crew, that one would have been tough without the crew. So from that point on, it was basically, you didn't need to directions on the trail. You just followed the little river that was going the whole way, and the ATV sections, you know, you zigzag through the puddles, and you know, it was. And then the next day, you know, even, you know, through the night out of Silver City, you could see your breath most of the night, which you would have liked.
Well, I actually did pace Charlene from Silver City back to Nemo that year. And I know she was towards the more end of chasing cutoffs. So I don't know what time she was at Silver City. We left Pilot Knob right at sunrise, and I was surprised how nice the ATV trail was. It wasn't slick from all of that rain, and I had forgotten that it had rained the whole time I was with her, because the trails were dried up and just fine at that point. It was great for pacing weather and pacing situations, my little stint. But that nice weather did not last all day on day 2.
No, and then, you know, Elk Creek was full that year. You know, it was full on the first day going through, but it even got fuller the second day going back through Elk Creek. But I managed to fall off the trail between AJ, Amanda Prouty was pacing me that section, and it wasn't her fault. The 50Kers had, you know, I left about an hour ahead out of Dalton Lake than the 50Kers from their start. But right before I got to Crooked Tree, the leader went by me, and I was kind of blaming the course for being muddy and everything, why I wasn't going very fast, but he flew by me like I was standing still, so I couldn't blame the trail anymore, really, for my slowness. Anyway, after Crooked Tree, at some point there, you know, those 50Kers were coming by me, and I guess I was being too nice, because there's not much passing room, and I would move over to let them pass me. Well, I moved over on one section a little bit too far and fell probably, I don't know, 6 feet down into, there was a bunch of dead timber down there, otherwise I would have kept going down. And one of the 50K people stopped and asked AJ if, you know, she needed help getting me out of there, and she said no, and she did pull my ass up out of there, and I had a cut on my forehead, and then I bruised my leg a little bit, but made it to Elk Creek.
I remember you coming in, and AJ was right on that forehead gash of yours.
Yeah, she's a registered nurse, and she ran ahead, you know, when we got close to the aid station to go grab some stuff, and you guys sat me down in the chair. You were there. You weren't part of my official crew, but you dug right in. You guys said I needed to change shoes and socks. I really didn't want to, but, you know, not going to argue with you at that point. And so we changed shoes and socks, and AJ fixed up my forehead, and one of my college teammates, Jim Glazer, was running with me from that section to Alkali, but we were going to start off. He didn't have a coat on. I told him, you got to get a coat, because, you know, once it started raining and I got out of that emergency poncho, I had a real rain jacket. Mm-hmm. I left that rain jacket on the rest of the way, and we hit more rain.
It was quite some rain.
The second day.
Yeah.
And, you know, made it to Alkali. Looked at my watch, and I had 99 and a half miles. And it's like, okay, wait, you know, you can't run that race, you know, knowing it's going to be 100 miles. You just run from aid station to aid station. But I was so cold when I got to Alkali, and I don't know if that's partially being dehydrated and lack of food, but I had my heavy-duty mittens on that I wear here when it's like 10 degrees or colder, with hand warmers inside of them, because I was just shaking so bad again there. And Dan Berkey was my last pacer, and he'd been driving the whole time, and he was just, I will never forget, he was just anxious, ready to go. And I kept looking at Dan saying, Dan, we're walking. We're not running anything here. My quads are shot. I mean, I'd love to run. I feel good enough to run, but my legs don't. But, you know, Dan is Dan, and Dan got me running that last section. I ran way more of it than I thought was possible. And part of it's, you know, you're getting closer to the finish line. You know you're going to make it. You know, as long as you don't twist an ankle or do something stupid, you know, you're going to make it. And actually, the more I started running, you know, things loosened up a little bit too. And it's once you you got one big climb out of Alkali for about a mile, a little over a mile, and once you get past there, you got more downhill. But the downhill, what was actually hurting the worst on me because my quads were shot. But like I said, Dan is Dan, and Dan wasn't having any of it. He was, you know, Dan's been running his whole life too, and he's 10 years older than I am. So, you know, he's been one of the people I look up to. That if Dan's still running, Brian can still be running.
So you finished your 100, and was it the next year that you did the 50K?
Yep.
And
Yep.
came back with your skull. Have you named your skull yet, or she just hangs in your shop?
It just hangs in my shop. I never
hangs.
named it. You know, people name their skulls, and you know, and I don't know how to answer that question. I'd probably name it, and I'd forget what the name was anyway. So maybe I'll have one of the grandkids. Maybe I could do that, but I'll have to put a little tag underneath it, and in fact, one of my grandkids, Maverick, was, you know, in the shop the other day, and he was asking he's 5 years old, and asking all kind of, because I got some deer heads and elk antlers and, you know, different things up there. But that buffalo skull is the centerpiece up there. That was the one that, you know, that I really shot for
Mm-hmm. So you did the 100 in 2023, the 50K then in 24.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden in 2025, Brian has this grand idea and signs up for the Cowboy 200. Where does that idea come from, that let's go for a 200-mile?
I wish I could answer that question too and know the answer. Part of it was one of my bike riding friends from college, Jim Morvac. He pushes himself, and he went across the U.S. with a group and rode his bike, you know, from one end to the other. And then Barry from Sioux Falls, he had ran it. You'd helped him out there, and you had attempted the race the year before I did it. And so thought, you know, and the elevation, you know, at my age anymore, I'm not into wanting the big climbs and the big descents. You know, just the distance itself is enough of a challenge. I don't need all the other. I don't want cold. I don't care about being fairly flat. You know, that isn't going to bother me, you know, or at least I didn't think it was going to bother, and it didn't. You know, and I didn't want technical, and Cowboy Trail isn't technical. It's a rails to trail. So I thought, why not? I guess.
And it just so happened to be on your birthday weekend.
Yeah, and that was another factor in it too. But you know, signing up for it, I knew you were my choice that I wanted to have for my crew chief. To, you know, I knew you knew the course, you knew where to be, you know, the aid stations would be and everything. But our friend Justin Andreas you had said that you were going to help him, and so here I was, probably 4 months out from the race start, and I really didn't have anything put together yet, and thought, well, I need to find a crew chief, you know, who it might be. And so I texted you, messaged you, and I think I messaged Justin, I think, first, to see if you, can't remember exactly, but you know, if you could be released out of your verbal agreement on helping Justin. So, and he had no problem with that, which was great. So I had a crew chief lined up. That's all I had lined up, but that was good enough. You know, somebody that could drive my pickup, have all my supplies in there. That's another thing. I had enough supplies to get to, anyway.
Last the winter and get to Oregon and back.
So, you know, I could have pacers, but, you know, John Branston approached me probably, I don't know, 6 months out and said, you know, do I have any pacers lined up? And I said, no, I didn't even have a crew chief really lined up. And he said, well, keep me in mind. I'll have to see what my daughter's high school sports schedule looks like, you know, when it comes out. And if it's doable, I'll help you. And I said, great. And so I had you lined up then. We're probably a month before the race. John messages me and says that he'll be able to help. So, you know, that was good. Didn't have any other help than that. And then Mike Bent called me probably 2 weeks before the race, maybe 3, I don't remember, but he was going to be available to come from Rapid City and meet up somewhere along the trail and help out. So, and then I was picking Mike's brain that whole time, what, hydration or gels, what does Mike use? And Mike uses SIS gels, and so Brian ordered 60 of those gels. And
had his first one on race day?
yeah, I did a lot of things you were not supposed to do. I remember you helping me fill up. I had a little container that could probably hold 3 or 4 of those gels, so I wouldn't have to be opening them up all the time out on the course. And after the race started, I don't know, maybe half hour in, I looked at my watch and thought, better try something. And so I tried that gel for the first time on the course. So, I shouldn't, one of the big no-nos, but it worked out okay. So, so to answer your question, you asked me what was my inspiration. It was you, Barry, and Jim Morvac, riding his bike across, and went down the rabbit hole once again.
And I say went pretty well for you that first day. You pick up John to pace you at mile 65 about in Ewing. And then John and I switched out in O'Neill, which is somewhere 80, 85-ish. And you were moving great that night yet. It was on approach to, I forget the name of the town, if it's Ainsworth or Atkinson, but mile 100, we're approaching that town. It's actually probably 103, I think, for the 200. And then you start complaining a little bit about your feet then. But yeah, what was your take on day one for you?
Day one was great. I mean, it was hot. It was warm. I'm seeing people wear their long sleeves and their hoods up, and I'm in a tank top and a hat on. I had the hat off half the time because I was getting a little bit too hot, so I would just take that off. But, a lot of my training, I'm going to go down another rabbit hole real quick here, but, we have about 6.5 acres in George, Iowa, where we're at now on an acreage. And one of my ideas was, I need time on feet, we got to mow the grass all the time. I have it's not self-propelled, but a push mower I normally just use around the house and some of the other tight places. And I thought, well, heck, I might as well be mowing with that. So I would spend 3-4 hours, out there just push mowing. And so that was getting my time on feet. And so I liked the heat on that first day. It didn't bother me, I guess. Appetite was good. Had no plan going in there pace-wise. I started off so slow, I might as well have been walking because, I was kind of scared to death on, being at that starting line. I gave you a hug there at the starting line. And it's like, okay, here we go. And probably a half mile into that, okay, let's walk a little ways and, we'll start jogging again. And, and kept that routine going. And I caught up with a guy, Jerry, from Illinois, I believe. Anyway, but he was passing me while I was walking, and then when he was walking, I was passing him. So I thought, well, see if he wants a running partner for a ways. The first aid station was 10 miles away, and so he said sure, and he was still going at 3.5 minutes of a jog, and then I think it was a 1.5 minute walk. So we did that to where I saw you the very first time, and that was working out great.
I have to say also, so your training was a little unorthodox, but also your race, not so much strategy, but you didn't start your watch at the start. You just had your watch just on normal watch mode and never GPS tracked the whole thing. So you had no idea what mileage you were at. You just knew the mileage it would come when it come. You just knew the time of day, and that was about it.
Yeah, I started running in the 1970s, like I said earlier. So I thought, well, let's just go back to old school here. If I can talk, that means I'm probably not running too fast. We're just going to go by feel. I'll just look at time of day. That's all I really need. Because I was going to have pacers at 65 miles, like you said, that, you know, if I wanted to know more information, I would, but I could get it. And so it was just, let's just run on how I feel. And just don't go too fast. Start off slow.
And yeah, you actually set a 100-mile PR then.
Yeah, I mean, I've only ran 100. And I, you know, technically at Alkali, I was almost at 100 miles in that race, and I don't remember the time. You know, I came in at the finish line of that at 31 hours and something for the, I had 107 miles on my watch when I got done. But yeah, you were with me during the night there on that section, and you knew how far, you know, 100 miles was going to be from where you started running with me at that aid station. And so we did actually pick up the pace a little bit, because we're 22 hours and 30 minutes, you know, we could beat that. So we picked up the pace a little bit and came through that for that PR, 22 hours, 28 minutes and 45 seconds.
Nice.
And I was feeling good. I mean, I was complaining to you about my feet at that point, but, you know, everything was going good. We passed a guy that, we passed an object on the trail that night that
I called a pile of trash. I thought I saw a little bit of movement. At first I thought it was a skunk. So I was ready to like push Brian out of the way and not get sprayed. And then I just saw, and then we got a little closer and realized, oh, it looked like, you know, a garbage bag laying on the side of the road. And as we walked by, I'm like, oh, don't worry, it's just a pile of garbage. Mark yourself safe from the garbage. And then later I pulled out the tracker and realized we had passed somebody. And then I realized that was not a pile of garbage on the side of the trail. That was a person rolled up in their tinfoil blanket. So I'm sorry to the person I called a pile of garbage.
Yeah, that race requires you to carry an emergency blanket with you. On your phone, you have to have the course downloaded and know how to use it, because when you check in, they check your bag to make sure you're carrying it. You have capacity to carry enough fluids with you, that you know how to work your phone to, you know, find the course, and that emergency blanket. And you got to have you have to have a headlamp with you at all times. So.
And yeah, you were moving great, other than a little bit of complaining about your feet. And it wasn't overly complaining either. But then as soon as we got to the aid station, then all the complaining really started. And I remember taking off your socks and shoes, and you said those were the worst feet you've ever seen. And they didn't even have a single blister on them.
Yeah, but what Jess doesn't realize is as you get older, the padding in your forefoot gets thinner and thinner and thinner, so your nerve endings are closer and closer. So I was feeling,
everything.
This is Brian's version here. I was feeling pain that they couldn't see, or they couldn't relate to. So I was kind of, you know, I'd set that PR. I was happy. I felt good. You know, physically, my appetite was good. I had eggs and sausage and pancakes there. You know, I was able to use the bathroom there, so I didn't have to go out on the trail somewhere.
And funny story while you were at the bathroom.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but entered the bathroom and there was a guy in the stall next to me. I went to the next stall over, and he got done a little bit before me, but he was washing his hands when I was washing my hands, and didn't think anything of it, because that's where the 100-milers start. You know, they gather up there, so I figured it was a 100-miler. And I found out later that was the leader of the race. I had no idea. So I told the story in I can't do a small write-up. I write a novel when I get done with a race. But anyway, I wrote up my version of sitting on the shitter there, that I think I was actually closer to Valentine, Nebraska, sitting on the shitter I was on than he was. So I think I was the leader of the race while going to the bathroom there at like you said, Atkinson or Ainsworth.
Starts with an A.
Yeah, it starts with an A. So that was the funny part that you were talking about there.
We also had probably the quote of the race there too, where Brian says, F ultras, these are effing stupid. I'm never doing an effing one of these again.
Yeah, I don't remember that part.
Oh, John wrote it down for us.
See, you block out those terrible, terrible insights, so that's why you think you can do another one of these again, I guess.
Yeah.
But I do kind of remember a little bit of that.
And then I remember we were putting your socks and shoes up back on you, and you said, "I can't believe I'm letting you do this to me."
Yeah, Jess was basically pushing me out the door, and John was he was going to run the next section with me, and Jess's famous last words, well, he'll get you back to the trail, because you detour off the cowboy trail to get to these aid stations usually, and so we detoured off, and then we had to get back on, and I have enough wits about me going, I think we missed a turn, John. So I had to get my phone out and actually look at it and go, John, we're going extra. We got to go back this way. So we had to backtrack and then get back on the trail. And
found your way to Stewart, which was about 10 miles away. On your way there, John finally let you in on the secret.
Yeah, I wasn't having much fun. My feet hurt. You know, I'm seeing my second sunrise coming up, and, you know, at least Stewart wasn't that far away, maybe, 10 miles or so. I told John, you know, we can just quit at Stewart. I'm done. But then I was curious too. I asked John, you know, do you know what place I'm in? You know, I was pretty sure I was in top 15, and thought maybe top 10 I might be in. And John kind of ignored me for a while, and we kept, you know, walking, jogging. And I asked him again, and he goes, do you really want to know? And I said, yeah, I want to know. And he said, you're in second place. So my first thing I told him was bullshit. I didn't believe him, because, you know, when you start off, I was in the middle of the pack, you know, all these people in front of me. And, you know, I remember passing some on the course, but, you know, not that many. And John, people that don't know him, he's 6'1", 6'2", at least 100, pushing closer to 200 probably, and muscles.
He's all muscle,
Yeah.
Tall and muscular.
You know, not your typical ultra runner for sure. And I told John, I said, if you're bullshitting me, I'm going to punch you. So I was ready to punch him in the shoulder. You know, that was probably me being a little bit delirious from being out on my feet that long. And he goes, no, you're in second place. And I said, well, and the leader was he told me the guy in the bathroom there, that was the leader of the race. And I said, well, what the hell are we waiting for? Let's go catch him. So I took off running. You know, I thought I was in my 20s again. And went for about a minute, and I stopped and started walking. I told John, well, I ain't catching him. I said, where's third place? So you could look up, you know, we all had trackers on, so he could tell me where third place was. So, but that at that point too took a little bit of the fun out of the race, because I'd look at these as adventures, and then once you start thinking that you could maybe have a podium finish, then it's
a little bit more work.
Yeah, it's going to take
fun.
a little of the fun out of it. So.
And then, yeah, you get to Stewart, and you were a lot better mood than you were 10 miles before. And John and I swapped. We really didn't talk pacing strategy at all, but I was ready to go. And that way John could have a breakfast and be ready for the next time. But so we swapped out pacing there, which maybe was a good thing, just because, I mean, that was hard for me to do. And John, with 10 miles on already, that would have been really hard for John to do. And I remember Nate, so the year that I had DNF'd, Mike Siebersma was running Cowboy, and Nate Cruz had paced. They didn't have that aid station at Stewart. They had to do a whole 30-mile block from Ainsworth all the way to Bassett without crew. And Nate Cruz talking about how hard that was, you know, pacing that stint. So I was like, I'm not going to let John pace 30 miles here. I'll just jump in again. And that was heat of the day. And Brian was not having any fun at that point, and Jess doesn't like the heat. And didn't have a cattle prodder on me, but I did all I could.
Yeah, I grabbed my poles at Stewart just because I thought maybe I could take some pressure off my feet and maybe make better progress. But that really wasn't a great idea. You know, tried it for a while, but not a great idea. Kept wondering then when the 100-milers were going to start passing us. You know, what would we have, a couple-hour head start on them?
Yeah, you had probably a couple-hour head start.
So And like Jess said, it was going to be another hot day, and there is shade out there at times. You can see it up ahead, and the first 100-miler went past us, just zooming, and thought, oh my gosh, I think he's going too fast. But it's hard to tell when you're not going fast, what actual pace that person's going. But I struggled in that section, probably the worst section of the whole time, just because the feet were hurting. It was just basically the feet hurting. My appetite was good. My quads, my legs felt good. It's just I couldn't get rid of that pain in my feet. We had changed shoes, we had changed socks at different aid stations and stuff like that. You'd worked on my blisters, and I knew Mike Bent was coming down and was going to start pacing at Bassett. And he's coming from Rapid City to there. Not sure how far that is, but it's plenty far enough that I felt really bad if I was going to have to drop out there. And Mike was going to drive that for nothing. I thought about calling him out there and telling him, turn around, I'm done. Jess and I, we found some shade. I said, I need to lay down for a little bit, take some pressure off my feet. She was really good that I kind of laid on the low end of it with my head so I could get my feet propped up. She sat kind of cross-legged, and I could put my feet up there. But then the 100-milers were coming by. I tried to sleep a little bit, but the 100-milers kept coming by.
Are you okay? Is he okay?
So, thought, well, might as well get up and go. And I've never rationalized so much in that section as I was going to quit. And these were my justifications. But then I also had justifications why I was going to go on. And you probably heard it more than you wanted to hear.
I heard a lot about the I'm going to quit justifications, not the going on. And I just kept on saying, let's just get to Bassett. Let's just get to Bassett. Let's just get past it. And we finally get to Bassett, got inside, a little AC. We tried to get you to sleep because this whole time you have not slept yet. And this is now in the afternoon of Saturday, day 2. And you've still got, let's see, Bassett I think is like 130, 35.
Something like that.
So you still got 65, 70 miles to go. Hasn't slept. You've been eating well, hydrating well, moving well, just not sleeping. And I remember you tried to sleep, but that just wasn't happening. And so you did decide to go, at least the next little stint is a little bit shorter. It's less than 10 miles with Mike, just to get Mike some time out there. And we saw you next at Long Pine, John and I did. And Brian was a completely different person after a couple hours on the trail with Mike.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, Mike ran at Black Hills, a little right after I was done there. And so we go back a long ways. He got me into the trail running, and he was kind enough to show up. And, nobody was listening to me about my feet. And I complained about my feet. And I suppose we were about 2 or 3 miles into that section to where we were heading to Long Pine. And Mike finally looked at me and said, Harmsy. And I said, that was my nickname in college. Everybody called me Harmsy. And I said, what? And he said, you need to quit whining. I'll put it on the good version. You need to
keep it PG.
Keep it PG. You need to quit whining so much. And I kind of laughed at him and said, all good humor has a little sarcasm in it. And he goes, that wasn't sarcasm. That wasn't humor. It was like, you need to quit complaining. You're going to make this. And he said, everybody out here, it doesn't matter if it's this race, any race, things are going to happen. Things aren't going to go quite right. And I guess that 10-minute little perk-up call from Mike was all I needed to. I was still going to complain, but I was going to finish this race no matter what. I mean, so I had that out of the DNF was out the door. That was, we're going to get done with this. So
And yeah, you stopped at Long Pine, you go inside, crew's not allowed in, so you go in and you had a nice, I think they had breakfast food there too for you.
Yeah, I had some pancakes and bacon.
Just sit at the windowsill and make sure you're eating, and we go through some race strategy.
I see Jess sitting in this window and asking me questions. What do you need this or you need that? And, we didn't look at my feet anymore. We just I changed shoes and socks again at Bassett, and we never looked at them again. I could walk, at the pace I was walking at, they didn't hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't hurt any worse.
Yeah.
They actually would feel good enough that I would try to jog for 20, 30 seconds at a time, and then I remembered why I was walking. But
yeah, and John took you that next stint, and I think it got dark on your next stint to the other A town of Ainsworth or Atkinson.
Correct.
And then I think you moved pretty well there, nothing too spectacular to make note of there. And Mike took you on to, the next stint's almost a marathon. It's about 25-mile stint. I think it's Johnston is the next aid station. Brian still hasn't slept, so Brian starts to see a few things in the dark there.
Yeah, I saw, it wasn't terrible there. Anybody could have seen this. It was, that Cowboy Trail has a lot of holes in it just from animals that like to dig there, and, the trail maintenance isn't, they don't get out there and fix up these places evidently that often. And, well, anyway, we were coming up on one of these spots, and there was a skunk there. You had to be there, you had to see it through my eyes, but there was a skunk there, and Mike was headed right for it. And I yelled at Mike, I said, "Look out." And Mike goes, "What?" And I said, "There's a skunk." And he gets a little closer. "There isn't a skunk." He goes, and they were actually piles of horse poop. And he goes, "You mean this? This is the skunk?" And yeah, I guess so. So, had that little incident. Other than that, I got to listen to Mike's playlist that he listens to when he's running ultras. I knew some of the artists. I didn't know them all. He had a backstory on a lot of them, so he was keeping the conversation going. And then I forgot to look at my watch, but we came up on midnight. So when I did turn 67, I celebrated it out there on the trail with Mike, and he made a little video and kept plugging away. Mm-hmm. That second night, the lights kind of got to me a little bit. The lights being, like you said, that aid station was a long ways away. And, we thought that's got to be the aid station up there. We've been out here a long time. Mm-hmm. And you get closer and closer, and Mike's looking at his watch, doing the math, and going, "I don't think so." And so it'd be lights of, a house or something, but it wasn't the aid station. So that was the only thing, I guess, in that section that bothered me a little bit, was we're not getting there quite fast enough.
And then you get to Johnson. John and I finally got my first sleep in the truck there, and I got up and John was not in the truck. And I'm like, what the heck happened to John? I go to the bathroom, I'm like, if I was John, I bet John's sleeping in the playhouse over there. There's a swing set, and they have a little top tower area. And sure enough, John had taken his sleeping bag out of the truck and slept out there that night. And then, Brian comes in with Mike. They look great. Brian maybe not moving so great. I remember helping you up into the aid station because there's a little bit of a climb, probably your 10 feet of elevation there off the trail.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah, there's a little stumbling. We had you. Get you sat down in the chair. I think they were making brats there is maybe what you had.
I had a hamburger there.
And the best cup of coffee you've ever had.
I figured they would have fresh coffee, and of course they didn't. I was drinking coffee at every aid station. I love coffee, and I can down it any time. And the one person said, "We got instant coffee. You can make instant coffee." So John, kind-hearted John, I'll go make you coffee. So, and he comes back with this, styrofoam cup, and he goes, "I've never done this before." And I thought, well, can't be that difficult. And I hadn't really made instant coffee either. And I took that sip out of that coffee, and holy cow, you know, it was, I've had graveyard coffee because I've had to work graveyard shifts plenty in my life, and even the graveyard coffee wasn't as bad as that cup of coffee that John handed me, but you can't complain at that point. You know, it had enough caffeine in it probably to get me to the finish for sure. And I do remember sitting down in that chair real quickly there, that it was a little bit lower than I expected, and kind of flopped in at the last the last 6-8 inches of that seat. But I think you guys I think I got out of that chair on my own. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But Jess took me from that one. What do we have? Another 25 miles?
25 miles to Valentine for the finish. We left in the dark. We saw sunrise. We had company from 100. I only remember one 100-mile lady in that stent that passed us. She was with us for a little bit,
Right.
and then she went on.
And she was an older gal too.
Yeah.
And she was a local being from Nebraska anyway.
O'Neill, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had tried some of that running again, and every time you did, when you'd stop, you'd say, "Oh yeah, that hurts my feet. Walking's just better. Maybe we'll run it in." But you didn't complain otherwise too much from there. But you did start seeing more things in that. I remember you just talking about, why do they have that ribbing along the whole trail? Can't believe they did that. Whereas, you know, the plastic edging, you were talking that they had plastic edged the whole side of the trail.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
You were hallucinating that part. I just couldn't figure out what the heck you were talking about. And then I realized that you're probably seeing something that's not there, is why I didn't understand you. But other than that, you still hadn't slept, and we are now on to the third morning. Saw a sunrise there.
Yeah, I saw 3 sunrises and 2 sunsets during that time. And I kept looking forward to that. You kept telling me there was a big, long bridge we were going to go over, the Niobrara River. And that would be about a 5K from the finish, roughly. So I'd never been to Valentine. I was trying to picture this in my head, how this was going to come in. And it was totally not what I had envisioned. And evidently, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. I was seeing things that I didn't even know I saw. So.
Yeah. Valentine's a little interesting. You know, all the other towns you can see for forever. And Valentine being probably the biggest town other than Norfolk on that trail, you would think you would see it for forever. But all of a sudden, I mean, where we come in on, and you finish at a brewery there, you come in right at the stockyards, so it's kind of on the back edge of town, and all of a sudden, boom, you're there. It's not like you were going through town until you got there. And so that was a nice little surprise for, hey, we're here,
Yes.
just around the corner, and you're done.
Yeah, and you made sure you kept me on the road because
no cutting across.
A straight line would have been just a little bit shorter to where the brewery was in the finish line, but had to go up the street and then make a 90-degree turn and then
keep you on the course.
Yep.
No disqualifications.
No, not at that point.
They haven't disqualified anybody for taking the shortcut, but I'd keep you honest for that second place finish there. And yeah, you finish. We had Mike and John at the finish line. Of course, race directors Casey and Chase are there. Some people who had dropped along the way, some people who had run some aid stations, other people waiting for their runners. So a nice little party. John and Mike had done a nice surprise. John and I had discussed this, and we realized it was going to be Sunday morning and what the heck was going to be open in Valentine. But John and Mike did some shopping and found some brownie bars and put some candles in them for a birthday cake for you.
Yeah, that caught me by, thank goodness they didn't have 67 candles there because I wouldn't have been able to blow them out. But the few candles they had, I took care of them with no problem without spitting. So yeah, it was pretty much surreal. I still look back at it and, at that finish, I wanted to jog across the finish line, but at that point it didn't matter. And so you and I just walked across the finish line, and even today it's hard for me to comprehend everything I was thinking. That I remember just driving to Norfolk, I picked you up in Sioux Falls, and it's almost 200 miles, and you don't, and that was a long drive. And you're going to be going through that, that long a distance. So, yeah, it's definitely something I'll take to the grave. Good memories for the most part. I needed the pep talk from Mike, and once I got that done, just a matter of keeping me going in the right direction.
Again, kind of having the right people at the right time with your crew pacers.
Yep.
For you.
Yeah, with you not being there, and John and Mike, that's another one of those people do these type things, and they do it by themselves. Hats off to them. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. They're another level than where I'm at, that's for sure. Your last episode, you talked about DNFs. It was a really good episode, and the part that I took from it, do you learn something if you do have a DNF and, it did not fail? And so that's wise words for sure. And, I hope I never have a DNF. I've thought about it, and Cowboy 200 was the first time I thought about a DNF. All the other races, I complained all through them. I would never do another one, but I was going to get to the finish line on all those other ones. So going forward, I kind of really want to embrace it more in the moment if it's possible. I'm going to help you this year on your 200 at Cowboy. I'm looking forward to that. I'm not knowing if I look forward to Jess in her finer moments in that.
Grumpy state.
I do remember every time I complained about that I said I was going to DNF, you never really answered me. You didn't say, yeah, that's a good idea, Brian, or anything when we were heading to Bassett. You just ignored me. And so I'm not sure how I'm going to handle you later this, summer when your turn comes.
You might get
that.
that.
The heat affects you way more than it does me. So, keeping your appetite and keeping you happy is going to be a little harder.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
You can deal with the blisters way better than I can.
So yeah, you go from in 2020 where you ran your first ever ultra and said never again to completing a 200, which during it you said these things are dumb, never again. You have since done the official inaugural one and only George Ultra Marathon. And so yeah, came back on that one, that they're dumb. And you pretty much pulled me through that one. And then you got one more race on your docket this year. Something different again? Yeah,
I'm going to do the blood run. I did it last year. I did the 12-hour run. I decided why not do the 40. They offered the 48-hour this year, so I signed up for that. I signed up for that before I started having some issues this year. I had a tooth infection for about 3 months, and that cut into my training time. I'm not sure how it affected me, but it affected me that I couldn't really run. I wanted to walk. I tried. It's been a rough year. So I'm a little bit behind where I definitely wanted to be. But it's a timed race, so it's not like I have to go 200 miles. I have to go 100. Well, I do want to get 100 miles. But, there's not pressure of, you have to do this many miles to get to the finish. You can do one, it's the blood run. People that don't know it, it's a 1.5 mile loop at the Good Earth Farm just south of Lenox, and you can make one lap and be done if you want to, or do as many laps. Your prize at the end of the day is a jar full of marbles.
Yeah.
You get a marble for every lap that you make, so you get your marbles back at the end of the day.
Yeah. Still finding them. Still finding them every year. Nancy finds a few more for me. And yeah, so going forward, so you're still doing ultras, crewing them, and yeah, obviously taking back the never again on those things. And you've also said, you've kind of put this out there that age is kind of just a number for you in doing these things. You have your friend Dan who's 10 years older than you, so you still have at least 10 more years to run, you said?
Yeah, as long as
he's still running.
As long as he's still moving, my countdown clock hasn't started.
So what kind of keeps, well, other than Dan, having to keep up with Dan, what keeps you going?
You know, the group runs out here, Good Earth. I haven't really been to Great Bear where Jeff does his. You know, I did one or two there last year. I've always said the ultra running and running in general brings generations together. I mean, we show up out here on Thursdays, you know, during daylight savings time, and we have we have in their teens up to my age and even older sometimes, you know, and you all have something in common. I mean, if you saw somebody, a 20-year-old gal on the street, you had nothing in common with them. 30-year-old, 40-year-old guys or gals, you really don't have anything in common with them. But when they show up out here, all of a sudden, you do have something in common with them. You know, you're all out in nature. You're all got to keep hydrated, nutrition. You have stuff to talk about. It helps keep me young, and I know that I'm kind of an inspiration for some of them. You know, that they've told me they want to be doing what I'm doing when they're my age. And that makes me feel good.
Yeah. So in this whole thing of running, you know, you ran high school, was kind of for you to make friends or at least get out of a place where you were feeling a little lonely, and then continuing to do that as an adult here. So I kind of maybe answered that question, but what has running kind of brought into your life, and what has it meant for you?
Well, besides my family, it's been my other family. I mean, I haven't kept in touch with all of them, but I've been blessed to run so many different miles with so many different people over the years, from Olympian athletes I've trained some training runs with back when I was in Minnesota. One of my high school teammates in Minnesota was second place in the 800 meters NCAA's Division I, extremely fast. Down to the people that don't start running until they're in their 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, the mom that had the second or third child that she wants to lose some weight, or somebody going through a divorce, guy or gal, cancer, you know, health reasons, you know, it's just so many different paths that get us out here together out on the trails. And, you know, we're all doing something that takes our mind off of what maybe brought us out here. And you find like-minded people.
Mm-hmm. Does that also kind of lead into your why of why you keep running, why you're out there doing these things?
Yeah, my definite why is the people. You know, it gets tough running in George. There's a couple runners in George. They're much faster than I am. You know, I've ran with some of them. They got to make sure, I just tell them, make sure you're on your slow day, your easy day. And I'll try to make sure I'm on one of my faster days so I can keep up. And it's just the people. You know, road runners are fine. I like the trail people better, but that's just the nature of the game. And a lot of those road runners today will probably find the trails someday in their life and just kind of be like me and think, oh, I should have done this sooner.
All right. I was going to close out the podcast. Any last words of wisdom for anybody out there?
Well, if you're thinking about getting into trail running or just running in general, you know, there's probably a group run around you. Don't be intimidated. There'll be somebody in that group that's going to keep up, you know, that won't let you get lost, you know, fall behind. Start off walking and jogging. Just not much words of wisdom here coming
Go
out
slower
of me.
to go faster in the long run. We'll just bring that one back around.
Yeah, there you go.
It's okay to go slow.
Yeah. Going slow is actually a lot of training methods now is, you know, you want to be in your zone too. A lot of the training miles, you know, you want to go faster some, but a lot of your miles are slow miles. And those are the fun miles. You can talk. You know, if you can't hold a conversation while you're running with somebody, you need to slow down a little bit. You know, unless it's your hard day, and then maybe you want to keep up with them. And so,
Perfect.
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you want to be on the podcast, shoot me a message and we can hook up like I did with Brian here. And thank you again for listening.
This has been a JWBN production. Thanks for listening.